want to just go over some of the things we think are most important. First is just prioritization. If marketing is not a priority for your company, that's probably where we stop, in my opinion.
I would agree, and I love what you say here, that it's got to start at the top, that regardless of how involved day-to-day the C-suite is in the implementation of marketing, that the top-level decision makers in that business unit or in that company have to say, this is what we're doing.
Absolutely. To show the value of marketing, I think that you can do this in two ways, and I think the C-suite is where you need to start. I've also seen, though, where people don't have access to their C-suite and want to promote this, and part of that for me has been working within a small cell within your own company to prove out a smaller model, to do a small pilot of how it works. And I mean, what executive, what sales, VP sales or CMO out there is going to be mad when a marketing and sales guy walks into their office and say, hey, look, this is what we did together, this is how it's working, and look how much better we're performing than our peers. Probably going to love that and want to roll it out. And so there are ways to start in smaller groups as well as try to influence it from the top down from the very beginning. And so don't be discouraged if your C-suite's not available to you.
Agreed. We always like to sell from the top down where possible. But I've got some businesses that I work with who they identify groups that want to buy, and by demonstrating that success, then they're able to get into more of the organization. It's the same principle. You may believe that marketing is going to work in your business unit or in your smaller division, and if that's the case, make it happen and demonstrate to the larger organization that this is a valid and effective way of doing things.
Absolutely. And then the last is if you are going to prioritize, in my opinion, prioritization means that you're actually investing in the tools that it takes to do this. It doesn't mean just say it and don't give the team the resources they need, and we'll get into some of those tools. Facilitation, I think that's kind of where I'm leaning with that as well. You need to facilitate the tools. You need to facilitate the teams to have the time to meet. You need to facilitate the open room and communication. You need to facilitate it through, understanding that if they got to make 100 phone calls, maybe they made 90, but they used that time with those 10 to have better communication, and understanding that within your actual process flows. So as a company, you need to facilitate this type of a program.
Agreed. Communication is such an important word, and I know that we talk about it a lot. I talk about it with companies that I work with. I can't emphasize it enough. When 9/11 occurred in 2001, part of the reason so many people perished that day was because there was a failure of communication. For example, there were first responders who ran into buildings that were burning when their commanders were telling them, leave those buildings. And that's an extreme example. But the reality is we can always work to improve communication between sales and marketing. If we do that at a distance, at a remove, we're not going to be effective. There are going to have to be times where we get the people in the room and communicate one-to-one, face-to-face. And if we'll do that, it's a major move in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I think there's a bullet here that I really like as well, and that's the cross-training departments on one another processes and tasks. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think if sales understand what marketing is actually doing and marketing actually understands what sales, there's a little bit of empathy created there. And it's not I do my thing, you do your things, but hey, this guy's really trying, and this is how much effort it took to just get that one lead. You probably take care of that lead a little bit more. Vice versa, sales guys being held to their, hitting their numbers, and how important that is to them and what it really takes for them to get there. Marketing can learn a lot from that and understand why their role is also so important to be passing them over.
You talked about them understanding what the other is doing. I would add to that, they need to understand why. Why are you doing it this way in the sales team? Why do you guys do it this way when you're marketing? Help us to understand that. A lot of people, even if they seem to have a difference of point of view or of opinion, they will come together and rally once they understand that underlying why. Why is it we do it this way?
Absolutely. Start with why. Communication, we could probably harp on this the whole time. This is marketing. I know, Chuck, you've got a lot to say on this.
Wow. Communication, well, I've already said some of it,
right.
But communication up and down the chain of command and across teams becomes so important. We have to understand why teams do what they do, what are they trying to accomplish, how effective are they in accomplishing that. We also need to understand within our team, if I'm on a sales team, I need to understand the type of communication I need to send back to the marketing team. What's most helpful to them in tweaking campaigns, generating leads that are maybe a little bit more qualified, or we need to communicate across those two teams in the context of exactly what is our target buyer, what do they look like, who are they? I think sometimes we get into our little silos and we convince ourselves. For example, if I'm a salesperson, I'll convince myself that we should be selling to this type of buyer in this type of market. And it may be for no other reason than that's the only person I've ever really sold to. Marketing could perhaps help me to understand that there are a lot of other people I could be selling to and really do me a huge favor in opening my eyes to some of the other groups and people I could be successfully selling into. But communicating across those teams, I really can't emphasize it enough.
I just completely agree as well. And, you know, you talk a lot about the professional communication, and I want to bring in just the personal communication. And the last bullet on this is just to provide ongoing sales and marketing team building opportunities. How many times have you had Christmas party and marketing department sits at the marketing table, sales department sits at the sales table? They're not commingling and they're not getting to know each other as people. And so I think, you know, in this game where all things being the same, sales and marketing continuing to fail, this might be an interesting tactic for you to look at. And how do you actually pair teams together and put marketing with sales so that they're actually developing relationships? Now they're going golfing together because, you know, as a marketer, I know I love to golf, but it's the sales guys who are always out there. Sad for me.
No, exactly. You know, in studies of people, we know that we like to associate with people who are most like us. That's human nature. And so whether we're in sales or marketing, we sometimes think, well, these are the guys who are most like us, and therefore we don't want to associate with people who are outside of that group. The reality is we're all a lot more alike than we are different.
Yes.
And so we've got to make this personal, whether these are in-office events or whether they are things that we do outside of the office. Making it personal, we get to know each other and we get to like each other better and we want to associate with each other more. We're going to work together more effectively.
Absolutely. Agreed. And that's part of maybe the recruiting process even, is understanding that. I think our last slide here, and we've run up on time, and so we're actually going to be going live on Facebook now. So if you have that, you can watch Chuck and I finish this conversation together here. Maybe one of the most important parts, and that's execution. I just threw up a big question mark. I think that we have a lot to say about execution, but my thought here was, who's doing it and how is it being done? And that's why I love having Chuck here. Can you talk to some of your experiences with this and how it's actually maybe what people have failed to do and then how what you think will make it work?
One of the first things that we see is that companies make a commitment by having both teams or the leaders of both teams in the same room at the same time to talk about how they integrate and work together. I'm not sure that I have a formula that we could use here, but I will give you some principles that I've seen work really well. First of all, getting the leaders in the room at the same time so that we can communicate effectively. Having follow-through and follow-up. In other words, there's a level of accountability that has to happen. If I'm the head of a marketing department, I've got to make my team responsible for doing the things that we agree will help to make the marketing function better. If I'm head of a sales team, I've got to hold myself and my team accountable for doing the things that make the sales function better. And then as leaders, we've got to hold ourselves and our teams accountable for communicating across those two teams in the way that we agree will be most effective. The reality is your first few steps in this direction may be kind of fitful starts, but you've got to stick with it. You simply can't afford to give up.
I think that's a great point. You have to stick with this.
Yeah.
I mean, so many companies probably have gone down this for a year, maybe even 2 years, and just not found success. Where would they really be had they stuck with it, though? And would they be one of the few companies that did bridge this gap? And at what point, you know, there's that study that says, you know, those who can bridge the sales and marketing gap actually have 20% higher annual revenue. What does that number mean for your business?
Absolutely. We work with companies, for example, in TechX, who have iterated and iterated multiple times. They pivoted in their businesses. And it wasn't until the second or third pivot that they finally hit on the right formula. There's no reason we can't do that within a marketing team or within a sales team while continuing to make progress.